Welcome to District Deep Dive, where we take a look at the history, culture, and political climate of each of Panem's 13 districts. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at District 11, Panem's main agricultural center and the spark that fueled revolution against it. The question that likely first comes to mind upon hearing District 11's export is, aren't there already two other agriculture-based districts? Isn't this ever so very slightly redundant? And yet, although I do understand why somebody would reasonably come to this conclusion, it's worth a reminder that Panem takes place in a world that has been absolutely decimated by war, climate catastrophe, and centuries of relentless overconsumption. It's highly probable the soil quality is poor to the extent the measures that currently suffice to feed our current population can no longer sustain even a fraction of it. Hence why numerous districts need to focus exclusively on food production. While District 9 grows grain and District 10 rears livestock, District 11 is saddled with the enormously cumbersome task of growing quite literally everything else. Given the overall immensity of this task, District 11 naturally has to be a bigger district, boasting a population of 138,000. Yet despite being the fourth largest district, District 11 is the second poorest, with the citizens not being allowed even a scrap of the food they produce. Although this isn't an incredibly unusual phenomenon within Panem of a district being denied the ability to consume their very own export, there is an implication that all citizens of District 11 receive are rations, with Rue making a remark that workers are only allotted extra food during harvest season so they can work longer, implying that all they receive is the bare minimum, exactly what would keep them standing and not a bite more beyond that. This cruelty is further intensified by the knowledge of where District 11 is located. In present-day Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. These are near absurdly hot areas where summer temperatures can easily potentially exceed 110 degrees. Any person that's ever spent an extended period of time outside in temperatures that hot knows the way that heat leaches your energy, and the danger that long-term exposure poses. But these factors make little to no difference to the capital elite, who demand a level of production so extreme that all district citizens, down to the smallest child, routinely work throughout the night. They work grueling hours in grueling heat from sunrise to sundown and utilize child labor to an extreme, with their superiors holding seemingly little regard for their children's ability to access a steady education or even live. Despite producing what is arguably the most vital export to ensuring the capital's survival, District 11 is kept destitute, with their houses consisting of simply constructed shacks so dilapidated Katniss views her deteriorated house in the seam as a mansion by comparison. The workers aren't even provided any proper medication for when they are injured in the orchards, fields, or granaries, despite the fact their district is riddled with tracker jackers. Even more sinister is the extreme and excessive peacekeeper presence within this district. Citizens are publicly whipped for crimes as minor as taking a mouthful of the food they grow, and executed for crimes equally as small. Anybody that doesn't meet a predetermined, near-impossible productivity standard is viewed as dispensable by the overseers that are implied to strictly monitor their each and every move. However, to me, the most frightening aspect of this district's layout is how imprisoned its residents are in comparison to those of the other districts. District 11 is surrounded by a 35-foot-tall metal fence topped with barbed wire and guarded strictly by peacekeeper watchtowers stationed within feet of each other, effectively preventing any form of escape from either above or below ground. The fact that District 11 is the most over-policed district and likely also knows the poorest degree of freedom in contrast to that of the other districts is no historical coincidence, with the ethnic and racial composition of the district being made up predominantly of African Americans. Every aspect of this district's composition is made in reference to the antebellum South, from the brutality of the overseers to the innovations that its citizens must implement to survive, from crafting their own medicines to secret, more discreet methods of communication via the mockingjays. Yet although the citizens of 11 have little in terms of possession or autonomy, at the start of the Hunger Games as a practice, they were actually noted as a district that traditionally performed well, at least until undergoing a seemingly radical shift by the time that we reach Katniss's games. It's not entirely surprising. District 11 tributes would naturally know how to wield and swing a wide array of blunt weapons, and would likely have at least a marginally better physical body condition than some of their peers. But it prompts the question, what changed? Although the tributes may have the skills and necessary abilities, the narrative seemingly leads us to the conclusion the reason that District 11 doesn't perform as expected is because they typically flat-out refuse to perform at all. This doesn't mean District 11 tributes have never harmed anyone in the arena, as there are obviously numerous victors. But of the games that we see, they've taken pains to protest in whatever small way they can. There's a striking parallel established between Reaper and Thresh, because both are tributes that are described as having a significantly higher chance at surviving the games than their non-career peers, and yet both are, for the most part, non-combatants. Thresh is described in book as being 6.5 feet tall and built like an ox, physically imposing to the point that careers immediately attempt to recruit him despite him originating from a district that hasn't performed well in years. Thresh's abilities are further insinuated to extend beyond mere bodily strength, as his assessment earns him a 10, which, for context, is 2 points higher than what Peeta wound up scoring. At the start, he kills a single tribute that charges him with a spear, and spends the entirety of the games in an area of the arena that reminds him of home, waiting for the violence and chaos to come to an end. Reaper, similarly, while not described as being as physically imposing as Thresh, is tall and well-built. Reaper is perceived as being among the most aggressive tributes by his peers and mentors alike, and has a history that had backed this notion, being the only member of them that had actually formerly killed, with him previously having murdered a peacekeeper. He also has the ability and means, but refuses to use them in the fashion that's desired of him. Reaper doesn't kill a single person throughout the entirety of his games, taking the time instead to care for the fallen and the living. He devotes himself to this to the extent that his literal dying act is him attempting to cover up the body of another fallen tribute, and Thresh himself actually makes a similarly powerful sacrifice, although it may not be as immediately obvious. The only other person Thresh kills in the 74th games is Clove, who, at the time of her death, was gloating over the death of a 12-year-old she claims she helped kill, making the only other time Thresh kills a moment in which he believes he is enacting justice, something he knows will likely wind up costing him his life, as it will attract the attention of his greatest opposition. However, beyond these two district tributes' refusal to play the game in the fashion they're desired is a keen awareness regarding the roles they're expected to fill and the way the capital perceives them. Reaper specifically is hyper-aware of the fact that he is perceived as being a violent threat in a manner the majority of the other tributes aren't, to the extent that he actually toys around with this perception. When his mentor is attempting to cultivate a strategy for him in the arena, he jumps out at her, knowing full well she will shrink back in terror despite her already knowing he is chained to their table, because he knows he is perceived as being inherently violent even in the instances where it would be impossible for him to be violent. However, the instant the games begin, he forsakes this notion entirely, but instead of going off on his own, he takes pains to veer in the exact opposite direction, becoming a protector, a guardian of the people that are too weak and too vulnerable to protect themselves. He fights defensively, not offensively, and even in the instances he is directly attacked, he generally backs off after the attacker disengages, demonstrating a deep regard for human life as a whole with his refusal to violently target people off their potential to deal him personal harm. Although there is the argument this reverence could merely be personal belief over a cultural one, throughout every game we've witnessed, there is an example of a District 11 tribute prioritizing the preservation of their peers' lives and dignities even if this comes at the expense of their own. To use Reaper once more, observe the graveyard he crafts for no other purpose than preventing his peers from suffering further indignities. The capital heavily relies on the desecration of district citizens' bodies for political messaging and propaganda, and by the time the 10th Hunger Games begin, 6 out of the original 24 tributes are dead, each and every body used for the purpose of public spectacle after. There is no dignity or reverence in the way they are handled. They are hung from cranes, they are left to limply dangle on the backs of horses, the wounds that killed them left on full display for capital citizenry to gawk at. This is done in order to create a contrast between capital children, who are covered, adorned with flowers and other decorative funeral items, followed by processions of mourners, versus the children of the districts, who are displayed like butchered livestock, framing them as being lower beings unworthy of the most basic human right. It doesn't merely frame them as being animal, it frames them as being distinctly lower than animal. In taking pains to cover the bodies, Reaper intentionally restores a small aspect of the tribute's humanity back to them, as well as rob the capital of an integral piece of political messaging. Rue does the same, caring for Katniss tenderly over multiple days after she is knocked unconscious, despite the fact the two had never even previously spoken. And what's especially heartbreaking about this exchange is that to Rue, Katniss embodies a fantasy of an older guardian Rue herself has likely never had access to. Despite being only 12 years old, Rue still has to help provide for 5 younger siblings, taking out Tesserae and working in orchards alongside grown adults, and likely has never had the opportunity to be the child that she actually is. After Rue is reaped, she, like all other tributes, watches the reapings that occurred in the other districts and sees as Prim, a girl her size and age, experiences the nightmare that she herself is presently living. But instead of being met with radio silence in the way that she was, Prim has somebody immediately willing to take her place that exhibits clear, extreme signs of distress that her name was ever called at all. For a child like Rue, that has never been extended the protections that children her age have, Katniss embodies the protector that she has craved her entire life. And to Rue, this sort of selflessness is something worth preserving. A course of action that reflects the notion that District 11 tributes, in times where they know they've no feasible means of making it out, will attempt to preserve at least a fragment of their original morality. Rue in particular is arguably the second most important character in terms of ensuring the Second Rebellion's success, although she never even lives to know there is a Second Rebellion. Rue firstly embodies and exemplifies every trait that Katniss loves within her sister. Her innocence, her gentleness, her willingness to help. Her presence is physically and emotionally healing, a reminder that even the most barbaric of circumstances cannot fully crush the core essence of what it means to be human. But at the same time, serves as a harsh reminder of the game's inherent and immense cruelty if lives as vulnerable and precious as Prim's and Rue's can be condemned without consequence. The games themselves are meant to frame the district's citizens as borderline animals that will immediately rip into each other the instant their lives and safety are threatened, people whose barbarity must be kept in check by capital benefactors. And yet the reality of Rue and Katniss's friendship couldn't be further off from this notion. It demonstrates to the districts there can be a genuine sense of solidarity between them, that if they unite in the face of a common enemy, they can overcome the insurmountable. Her existence is far more impactful than her death being a brutal example of the capital's atrocities. Her life, humanity, and willingness to dream openly demonstrates to the districts that things they viewed as impossible are achievable. Her call, the three-whistle note, is the one that becomes synonymous with revolution. It is District 11 that is the first to truly rebel against the capital, and it is District 11 that is among the first to secure their freedom. In the face of unimaginable brutality and relentless oppression, the citizens of District 11 embody a strength and solidarity that transcends their circumstances. From Rue's compassion to Thresh and Reaper's quiet defiance, District 11's tributes remind us that even in the darkest times, humanity, dignity, and justice can prevail. Their courage serves as a lasting reminder that true change often begins with the simplest, yet most powerful acts of resistance. Thank you so much for attending another episode of District Deep Dive with us, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And here's an extra special thank you to our Patreons. What we do would not be possible without your support. If you would like to count yourself among them, the link is in the description. Thank you so much for your time, and have a fabulous day.